Welcome everyone to CCI Huronia's 8th webinar on COVID-19 and how to deal with this crisis in your condo. It's hard to believe that we've been doing these for 2 months straight now. Thank you for joining us again tonight. My name is Sonia Hodis. I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia, a condo lawyer, as well as your moderator tonight. If you've missed any of our first 7 webinars, they are recorded and available on our website at ccihuronia.com under the resource content tab. Under the sub-tab webinar. So you can find all of them there. Who are we? Well, the Canadian Condominium Institute is an independent nonprofit organization that was formed in 1982. We have chapters across the country, and in Ontario we have 8 chapters alone. CCI Huronia is one of those Ontario chapters. CCI's main objective is education. However, we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. If you want to experience the benefits of membership of CCI and you're not currently a member, check out one of your local chapters and consider joining today. And Mina's going to put some information in the chat box about where you can find links to the chapters and a link to CCI Huronia's membership page directly. In addition, CCI National has collated a bunch of resources relating to COVID-19, which can be found on the national website under the cci.ca, under the resource center at cci.ca. There's also a direct link on the national landing page. A link is also found in the CCI Huronia website under our resource center page. This is a great resource for a collection of information from across the country, from various chapters from coast to coast. In addition, last week, CCI National hosted a webinar that was held on May 7th, and a recording of that webinar is now available in the Resource Center and will also be available on our website shortly. Don't forget to follow CCI Huronia on Facebook to find out about our upcoming events. And once again this week, we've got new news from the government. One of the many reasons to join us every week is to find out what's happening as it relates to COVID and condos. Last week, the government announced that the emergency orders were being extended to May 19th. Today, we got an announcement early this afternoon that the state of emergency has been extended to June 2nd. The government is saying that the stage 1 of their 3-stage framework is going to be ready to be opened coming Thursday. So we're probably going to get some more information Thursday in terms of what the new list of essential services is going to look like. There's some talk about increasing the limits of gatherings from 5 to 10. So be sure to join us again next week, May 19th at 7 o'clock, to find out what the new updates are. As the country starts moving towards reopening, we are also starting to shift the focus in our webinars to issues not only that condos have to deal with right now in the midst of COVID, but also to proactively start preparing for reopening and how that's going to look for condos and how we're going to all adjust to the new normal. So tonight you're going to see many speakers talking about proactive measures that condos should be thinking about as we gradually shift into a reopening mode. And one of the main topics tonight is going to be amenities. So we welcome you all back again this week. We've got another great lineup of speakers and topics. We have many guests with us tonight. From our CCI Windsor chapter, we have Bill Norris and Luis Hernandez. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. Always great to see you. And we have Dr. Kati Kamkar, who's a clinical psychologist for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And she's also a condo owner, so she's got a great perspective for mental health and also understanding what it's like to live in a condo. We have Lee Merzwolk, who is the CEO of LCM Property Services, and Maria, I'm going to try this. I hope I don't goof this up. Korpakowski. I hope I got that right. She's a public health inspector with Middlesex London Health Unit. We have Stephen Reynolds, who's the president of the Ontario Cemetery and Funeral Professionals Association, as well as a funeral director at Oakview Funeral Home. And from the CCI Huronia Board of Directors tonight, we have Ashley Winberg, Jeff Struwing, Evan Schulnick, John Jeffs, and myself, Sonia Hodis, as speakers. And our bios can be found on the CCI Huronia website, ccihuronia.com. So thank you to all the speakers for joining us tonight, dedicating your time. Thank you to the Board of Directors for dedicating their time and helping to plan this webinar and put it together. Before we get started with our first speaker, a couple of housekeeping reminders. Please make sure that you keep your phones and mics muted, that you keep your cameras off. We are trying to get the best recording possible, so that will help us do that. If you have any trouble with the connection, end the meeting and log back in. Last resort, you can always log in by phone. As always, we will not be taking any questions live during the webinar, but you can use the chat function. If you just move your mouse over your Zoom screen, you'll see a little box that says chat. It looks like a thought bubble. Type your question in there. The board is monitoring the chat box. The speakers are monitoring the chat box. Our chat box is quite lively, so we will try to get your question answered there. And if not, we will answer them hopefully at an upcoming webinar. And finally, our disclaimer, please be advised that the information today is general information, and because things are changing so fast, what you hear today may not apply to your specific fact situation. So it's more important than ever that you rely on your professionals for advice about your specific fact situation. If you are a director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Condo Act, you need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your professional. This webinar is not intended to provide you with opinions that protect you under Section 37. In addition, for those that are viewing this as a recording, the information provided in today's webinar is current as of May 12, 2020. Because things are changing rapidly, the information today may not be relevant at a later date. And finally, because we do have people who are viewing us outside of Ontario, any references to legislation during this webinar are either references to the Condo Act or other Ontario legislation. So if you live in a different province, please be careful and make sure you check with your professionals to make sure that that legislation or the comments that we make apply in your situation. So without further ado, let's get started with our first guest, which is Dr. Kati Kamkar. She is, as I said, a clinical psychologist with CAMH. She's a condo owner. She's an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She sits on numerous boards of directors. She's got a wealth of experience, and tonight she's going to talk to us in our mental health segment about adjusting to the new normal during COVID-19. Kate? There you go.
Perfect. Technology always causes anxiety, so I'm glad that everyone can hear me now. And good evening. What an honor to be here with all of you this evening, and thank you so much for having me. So yes, of course, mental health, especially during COVID-19, such an important topic. And when we talk about mental health, health is health, whether it's a physical health or it's mental health. And surely we know that through the latest poll, there is, of course, increase in anxiety, in stress, and definitely an increase in mental health during COVID-19. And this is not surprising, as we have all noted that throughout this pandemic, we have pretty much globally witness our daily life, our daily structure change entirely, almost like being shattered entirely. Daily structure, routine, our habits, and of course this is going to create tremendous worries and stressors in terms of our employment, in terms of finances, also how to juggle multiple roles it could be at home, but also everyone has very much experienced it differently. The first thing is really around, yes, COVID-19 has generated a range of emotions, from feeling sad, anxiety, it could be also mood irritability, anger. We also know that it has generated tremendous amount of thoughts, but thoughts mostly related to worries. And when we tend to have worries, often they're oriented towards the future. And also when we start worrying with all the what if questions, it tend to often have this catastrophic flavor into it as well. Certainly with COVID, we also know that there is a fear of infection to the self, a concern about infecting others. Now, also also people feel, often report that they feel scattered or they feel much slower than others. And that's also very true, because our flight and fight response, the inbuilt alarm system that we all have, is activated more often than not. So things that, for example, before we wouldn't think about. So you leave the house, you touch the elevator button, you open the door, you do your grocery shopping, you bring the items home. Now for everything we do, and there is a threat. So we need to protect ourselves with the mask and then the gloves and washing our hands. So the brain is constantly thinking, and definitely we are seeing a threat. So the alarm system is activated. And that is also why when we feel more fatigued than general than before, or we feel like more brain scattered, or we feel that our productivity is down compared to before, that's very normal. So the other aspect, before we turn into tips and strategies, is very much that yes, grief COVID-19 can be seen as a grief, and grief is very much works on a continuum from, it could be, yes, I miss going out and grabbing my coffee, newspaper, and going to the office, to I miss the social gatherings, to, of course, the other extreme, which is the death and the mourning and the illness. What I want everyone now is to really grab the paper and pen, please, because now I want everyone, the goal for me to be today is I want everyone to build their own individualized pathway to self-care and how we can all build our resiliency. And I think that if there is even one thing you can pick as a home message, it will be fabulous. So again, please everyone, paper, pen ready, or you can type it on your phone however you want. So the first thing is really around, we want to recognize that our range of thoughts and our range of emotions are normal. So I want you to normalize, these are all normal range of thoughts and emotions. Whenever we are not able to engage in our previous activities, we have a tendency to build our identity based on our activities. So when suddenly everything changes, we feel that we start engaging in kind of this negative self-labeling, like I'm a weak, I'm not as good as before. So a lot of negative thoughts it can generate. So what's important is that this is a change. We need to normalize the change. And now, so of course, we know more opening of the businesses. And then after another, stage 2, they're talking about, stage 3, we're talking about, so it's going to be a new life, a new routine. After vaccination is going to be again a new routine. So we need to normalize all those stages and appreciate the sense of self and all we do, regardless, again, of the activities, that everything that we are able to put forth. So number 1 is normalizing the reactions. Number 2 is, yes, with the new normal, and we're going to have a series of new normal, we do need to set new structure and new routine. And that's going to demand a lot of psychological flexibility. So psychological flexibility is, what is the new reality? And if the reality changes, it means the outcomes will change. So that means that I also need to change my expectations. I also need to change maybe my thoughts and my interpretations, because the closer we are connected to the reality, then the better the outcome, the better we are able to make decisions and problem solve. So new routine and structure, and that's different for everyone. We need to figure out, yes, proper sleep hygiene, when to get up, making sure we have a healthy breakfast, engaging in stretching exercises, and depending on all the juggling and responsibilities, how we are able to prioritize responsibilities, and at times also delegating tasks. Now, some people have gone from feeling bored to others feeling very much overwhelmed. There was a very funny cartoon I saw once, that where they were showing this little child opening the door of the closet and saying, oh, I found mommy over there. So that really shows, again, if there is a risk of, again, multiple roles all at the same time, prioritizing responsibilities, delegating a task, but it also means isolating within the isolation. So really always setting the me time. And me time doesn't have to be 3 hours a day. Sometimes it could be 5 minutes there, 10 minutes there, but we do need that me time to be able to recharge our batteries. And again, as individuals, we function much better whenever there is a routine and structure, even though here we will have to change it. Setting boundaries is also helpful. Yes, again, we do need to be updated with the news and the latest updates, very important, but we need to set a boundaries between how much I think I have enough and also maybe engaging in other meaningful activities or maybe watching other things on television. So that's depends their individual differences, but then also there is a difference within the self as well, depending on our tolerance level, our thermometer, and so on. When we talk about self-care, it also entails how to create this balanced, healthy diet and then also exercise. We don't need to go to the gym if we're not able to go to the gym. Sometimes any stretching at home or maintaining physical distance, going outside for a healthy walk can be a tremendous difference. We know through research, even 3 times a day for 15-20 minutes, direct impact on our mood, physical health and mental health. Same thing, what we eat has a direct impact on our mood. So really creating this healthy balance. And healthy balance means that, yeah, you can have your treat, absolutely, but make sure that it is balanced. The other thing is when we talk about sensory grounding, so the grounding technique is really around focusing on the here and now, the moment and the present time. So when we worry and we feel anxious, the mind tends to travel to the future. When we feel upset and sad and down, the mind tends to travel to the past. And we often forget about the here and now. So sensory grounding is how can I use my senses? So what I see, what I hear, what my body touches, and the sense of smell and taste to be connected to now. So for example, it would be when you walk outside, feel the fresh air touching your face, when listen to the birds, or smell maybe flowers or the plants, or when you have your coffee, you want to feel it, you want to feel the zip of coffee or zip of water. So making sure that we are connected to our senses. Part of the grounding is also every day appreciating any positives that we have so that we can practice gratitude. Anything counts. Any positives, making sure we have a check mark for the positives. So it could be, you know what, today I wanted to do my 10-minute walk. I had to send those 5 important emails. And also I wanted to create a recipe. Wonderful. Check mark, check mark, check mark. And also practicing gratitude as well. Part of the psychological flexibility is also focusing on what we have control over. So with a lot of the anxieties, a lot of the worries, which are extremely understandable, a lot of new normals and new routines coming up, is going to generate a lot of worries. So we want to distinguish between current worries, so worries that right now do exist, the problems that right now do exist, and potential ones, the ones that right now do not exist, because we want to put our energy and time into the current worries. So really focusing on what we have control over. And all of those eventually will lead to psychological growth. And yes, I'm getting this wonderful warning. I love that technology. You are in your last minute. All right. So let me finish here. Self-compassion, self-kindness. Please be kind to yourself. So that means be mindful of your thoughts and your emotions so that you can broaden and you can put them into perspective. Remember that we are all human beings, so there's always imperfection into everything that we do, and not to judge yourself. Self-kindness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kumpar. We really appreciate having you out today, and also a big thank you to your son for being such a great boy tonight.
Thank you so much. I will tell him.
All right, so moving on, we're now going to basically start talking about amenities and what do we do in terms of amenities as we start to reopen, as the province starts to reopen. And one of the questions that we've been getting lately is about pools. So we have with us tonight Lee Merswolk, who is the CEO of Lee, you got to help me out here. What's the name of the company again? LCM?
LCM Property Services.
Yes, LCM Property Services. Thank you. And he's an expert on pools. So he's going to talk to us about what we need to do to protect the asset itself. And then we're going to have a discussion about what we need to think about when it comes to opening pools. And we're going to have Anne-Marie Kurpakowski, the public health inspector, talk to us about pools from that perspective. So Lee, start us off. What do we do to protect this asset, even if we're not going to open the pool right now?
Well, absolutely. So we all love our pools. So I'm going to talk about 4 areas, but you'll also notice a link to a download from our website, which is very detailed as to what we should be doing now and as we potentially look to open during COVID-19. So our first is what must be done to protect our asset if we have an indoor pool, even if we're not opening it up for swimming. So a good question. While we're awaiting our orders to reopen, we want to secure that premises to prevent access so that no one who is unauthorized is using the pool or causing damage to the pool. We want to continue operation of our circulation equipment where the water is present. We also want to perhaps reduce flow where it's allowed through that jurisdiction, or if your system allows for it. We can also reduce the makeup water. So usually we would have 20 liters of water per bather per day. So we can obviously reduce that without so much bather load, but we don't want to ignore it completely. Fresh water is always important. We do want to continue to add that fresh water. We want to continue regular inspections. So we want to check on our pool. We want to use a certified pool operator to do that. We want to monitor our water quality. We want to keep the water balanced. And maybe we don't keep our sanitizer as high as usual, but still, if we want to keep it at a 2 or a 3, that would be a good idea. We want to keep our water healthy. We want to monitor filter pressure, and we want to continue to do the backwashing because that's going to keep our filters clean and our water clean. While obviously we don't need heat, so we could go ahead and turn down or even turn off the heater while we're not using the pool. We want to plan ahead for when we think it may reopen and make sure we turn that back on, test it in plenty of time ahead. CDC also strongly recommends steps be taken to keep Legionella and other bacteria from growing. So when we have extended closures of hot tubs, spas, we can have growth of bacteria, so we want to monitor, keep that in check. Examining our equipment regularly, so this would be a daily. We want to check for leaks, check our seals, make sure it's running properly. It's important to maintain good communication with our staff, ones who are working in the building, so they know what they're supposed to do with the pool, who should be in there, and how it should be maintained. We want to identify additional needs based on anticipation of orders of opening up. This will include such things that are detailed in the document you can download as spacing for your chairs and numbers of people that may be allowed into the pool deck. We want to maintain communications as well with our community so that everyone knows what's going on. They can anticipate what's taking place and they understand the reasons why so that they're not upset by it. We want to be ready to open when restrictions are lifted, even if it's a limited capacity. This will likely reduce the time needed to gear up for increased capacity when it's permitted. We want to also be patient. It's important that we do not open our facility before local guidelines allow. Be cautious here. We don't want to jump the gun. We want to also contact public health to schedule inspections as soon as possible. You may be required to have an inspection of your pool before you open. Let's remember that our public health teams are under a lot of pressure right now, and they may be working with limited resource. So let's think well ahead on that one. Review your insurance policies as well, and maybe talk to legal counsel to see if there's general liability for the premises. Most of those will exclude injury from communicable diseases, so we want to be cautious there. And also we'll want to schedule increased cleaning and sanitation for washroom facilities that may be connected to the pool and other facilities that are connected to our pool, and including the deck. Remember that COVID-19 is a heavy virus and will drop to our pool deck. We can be rest assured though that the chlorine in the pool will kill any bacteria and virus in the actual pool water. So what must be done now if you have an outdoor pool to protect our asset, even if you're not opening it up for swimming? Maybe you're not even opening it up this year. Well, it's important to clean all the surfaces, even if you don't open. You really don't want 2 seasons of dirt and staining to accumulate. This may be a great time to get caught up on some necessary maintenance, doing any maintenance to your tanks and filters, cement repairs. Make sure to stay on top of any issues that could get worse with time. Well, even if you're not opening, you will want to check the condition of every aspect of your pool. So the next question, does it matter what type of material your pool is made of or what size? Well, there's different considerations for different materials. Yes, different pools of different kinds require different treatment. We'll talk first about rubber liners for pools in particular. These need to be checked for leaks in the liner. All pools, but especially pools with liners, need to have pressure on the wall of the pool to offset the pressure of the ground on the outside. In the spring, rain and runoff water can erode around the pool, and without the pressure of the water in the pool, you can have your sidewalls cave in, and this can become a very expensive repair. Cement pools likewise will need pressure of that water up against their sidewall to avoid erosion. However, these will be sturdier than our rubber liners. Fiberglass pools, well, they're better here again, but again are likewise designed to have that back pressure of water in the pool. No matter what size your pool is, we want to consider the effects of leaving the pool closed for the entire summer. When your pool is closed, the winter, it's going to cause problems. So really it's best to get your pool up and running. And we really would prefer to see you open the pool as far as making it clean and usable.
Thanks, Lee. All right, so switching now to the public health side, and what type of things should we be thinking about at getting ready and when the pools are going to be able to be open? I know, Lee, that we don't have a lot of direction right now from the government, but, Anne-Marie, I know we don't have a lot of direction from the government right now, but from a public health perspective, what are your suggestions?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Lee. A lot of the points that you had actually speak to the points that we would suggest as well. So that maintaining of the pool surfaces, that's going to help from a number of standpoints. Both you're going to be ready for, if pools do open summer season or later in the fall, as well as preventing things like vector-borne disease issues. So if you have standing water, you're going to invite the mosquitoes, breeding happens there, then we're kind of dealing with a mosquito issue. So kind of, I think it covers multiple spots there for doing that regular maintenance. And the important part that you started with is providing a secure kind of enclosure so you don't have unintended access to the pools. From the standpoint of kind of when we get to the point where we're able to open up these pools, as Sonia mentioned, we don't have any direction yet as to when that's going to happen here in Ontario, and we don't really have guidance materials yet from the ministry. So I know here in Middlesex, London, we do have a group that's kind of working on some materials that we'll be able to put on our website and hand to our operators. The important thing to look at as well is, I realize you guys are kind of across Ontario, so making sure you're speaking to your specific public health inspectors from your jurisdiction. So we do have material in terms of COVID-19 on our website at www.healthunit.com, and that's here in Middlesex, London. I'm sure that all the other the other health units also have information on their websites. So if you go on our website, I can speak to ours, there is a guidance, documents, and resources section, and that'll have general information on sanitizing, disinfecting your kind of high touch areas, as well as kind of steps to take in terms of, as Lee mentioned, the physical spacing or physical distancing. So that's going to be an important component with trying to prevent the spread once you are able to open, as well as if you're doing maintenance on your pool surfaces or the pool itself, making sure that any staff or service personnel that are on site are also following the physical distancing, hand hygiene, and preventative measures as well. So employee screening. So I don't know if that's something that is already being done, where you're screening staff that's coming on site or trades that are coming in to ensure that they're not working while they're sick. So that could be, you know, of course, you're not going to be swabbing them to see if they're positive with COVID, but kind of looking at those, what symptoms, and kind of, you know, don't come to work ill. In terms of whether there's going to be any screening for patrons, we haven't heard anything about that yet. Depending on what sector you're in, it's sometimes useful to be able to kind of screen others that are coming in, not just staff. Again, I don't know what that guidance will look like in terms of recreational water facilities. But definitely there is that information, at least on our website, under guidance, documents, and resources. There are a number of documents there, as well as there's a section for, where to go here? So prevent the spread, and then there's specific kind of the distancing and kind of how to protect yourself as well as protect others. I think between what I've said and what Lee said, a lot of the things would be very similar. And right now, like I said, I don't have kind of ministry specific guidelines to provide, but something to think of would be kind of that staffing. If you're going to be doing employee screening, what physical distancing looks like for your venues, how you're going to increase the accessibility for hand hygiene, and making sure that, you know, you're able to kind of meet those requirements once you're able to open to the public, as well as prior to doing that when you're doing the maintenance.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
So we did have a question that came in with respect to whether or not you're going to be able to allow so many people in the pool or so many people in the spas. And I guess the answer at this point is we don't know. And that's the best answer we can give our participants, but we might have to have you back when the government releases some more guidelines, and perhaps you can keep in touch with us and let us know if something's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do roll that out and what the numbers are going to look like. So.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now turning away from pools as specific amenities to just talking about amenities generally, we're going to talk about legal and practical considerations for opening your amenities. And we're going to start the conversation off with Ashley Winberg, who's going to give us the legal perspective. Ashley?
Hi, everyone. So currently, as you all are aware, under the provincial order issued under the Emergency Management and Civil Protections Act, condominium corporations are required to keep their common element amenity areas closed. Now, once this order is lifted, there may still be a municipal requirement or recommendation that you keep your common element amenity areas closed. Now, if there is a municipal requirement or recommendation that these facilities be closed, I would recommend that you keep those facilities closed. And also, if you are permitted to open them, follow all guidelines issued by the appropriate authorities. Now, once there is no requirement or recommendation that these facilities be kept closed, it's really going to be up to your condominium corporation to determine whether or not you want to open up these facilities. And there are a number of things you have to keep in consideration before you do. The first is that under the Condominium Act and the Occupiers Liability Act, your condominium corporation would be deemed to be the occupier of the common element facilities for liability purposes. And under the Occupiers Liability Act, your condominium corporation would be required to take reasonable steps to prevent against foreseeable harm. So if there's no vaccine and COVID-19 is still present in Ontario, it could be foreseeable that someone could contract COVID-19 as a result of using perhaps a play structure on your common elements, a gym, or one of the other amenities that you may have on your property. So you do need to take reasonable steps to prevent against protect against that foreseeable harm. Some things that you could do, you could have users execute a waiver that would have the effect, ideally, of absolving your condominium corporation of liability in the event that they do contract COVID-19 as a result or in relation to using the facilities. However, the waiver in and of itself would not be enough. Ideally, you'd want your condominium corporation to create rules or restrictions or policies with respect to how and when the facilities can be used. The restriction should be consistent with whatever is issued by the appropriate authorities. And you might have a requirement that limits the number of people that can use certain facilities at a single given time, limit the hours, or require that individuals wear personal protective equipment when they use the facilities. But those restrictions will only be effective if they're actually enforced. And for condominium corporations that do not have an on-site security staff or an on-site superintendent, that could be difficult. Also, if you open up these facilities, you're going to have to ensure that they are properly cleaned and disinfected at much more frequent intervals than you otherwise would have done. This could be numerous times a day, or perhaps every hour or 2 hours, depending on what local authorities are recommending and the frequency of use. Again, if you do not have on-site cleaning staff or an on-site superintendent, it may be difficult for your condominium corporation to do this. So when you take those two factors into account, the requirement that you enforce any restrictions and that you are likely going to have to keep up with increased cleaning and disinfecting, you're going to have to assess whether or not your condominium corporation can afford to actually open the facilities given those additional costs that you will likely incur. And at the end of the day, you may determine that it's in your corporation's best interest not to open up the facilities, given the increased costs or given the risk, because you're not able to prevent against the foreseeable harm in a reasonable manner. And that's the message that I want to leave you with tonight. This is a very uncertain time. This is a novel virus. Even if these government restrictions are lifted, there is no requirement that you open up your common element amenities. And it's really up to your condominium corporation to assess whether or not you're able to financially and really take the reasonable precautions necessary to protect yourself and your community.
Thanks, Ashley, and that's a really good point. Every condo is going to have to evaluate that on an individual basis. So Jeff, who is a property manager and a CCI Huronia director, from a property manager's perspective, what are some practical considerations that you are thinking about in terms of opening the amenities on the properties you manage?
Yeah, so tying in with a lot of things that Ashley's already covered, it's going to depend on each corporation or shared facilities on their unique assets. Practically speaking, large outdoor assets, recreation facilities like tennis courts, marinas, park areas should be fairly easy to maintain physical distancing. But when you get into tighter confined spaces like a small fitness room or a sauna, hot tubs, it's very difficult to maintain the 2 meter separation or 6.5 feet. So signage and...
Okay, I found this on the web for it's very difficult to maintain the 2 meter separation or 6.5 feet.
Looks like Siri wanted to join our webinar. Sorry about that.
She wasn't on our list tonight.
No, she was not. So the challenge will be the confined spaces for the most part. I think signage on the facilities with a restriction on number of users and precautions required to take place. Messaging out to all the owners in general, perhaps developing a registration process to book times like you would tea time at a golf course for use of the sauna or the fitness room with sanitization taking place in between. As Ashley indicated, the cost for doing extra sanitization and cleaning could be rather excessive and might be cost prohibitive for especially smaller corporations where they wouldn't necessarily have staff on site and would have to hire contractors or consider hiring their own staff to do so. In a large facility where you have on-site staff, they're probably going to be busy monitoring the number of people entering the facility and providing the warnings and precautions to them and educating them on physical distancing. So they might not necessarily have time to wipe down all the fitness equipment or the squash court on a regular basis. All the touch points, handles, handrails, faucets and handles in bathrooms will be highly frequented by the guests likely. So it's going to depend a lot on what the province allows. I suspect we're going to start seeing some of these things open up next week with Ford announcing he's going to make another announcement on Thursday. So the key thing will be able to adapt quickly to what the regulations are. But as Ashley has indicated, the condo corporation or shared facility doesn't necessarily have to open a facility just because the province is allowing it. If it's not financially feasible or the staffing isn't available to maintain the safety required and the sanitization required, then it might not be the best thing to open the facility.
That's a good point. I think between Ashley's point of liability and keeping that in mind and the practicalities of being able to make sure you protect yourself from liability, it may be a lot easier to just keep those facilities closed for a little bit longer. So thanks both to Ashley and Jeff for those insights. All right, so moving away from amenities, we now have with us Louis, who is from our CCI Windsor chapter, and he's a condominium lawyer. And he's going to talk to us about board interactions during COVID. Louis, what have you been experienced during this time period when it comes to board interactions?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me on this webinar. You know, it's really nice to cooperate with another CCI chapter from Ontario. And that's a really interesting question. I find that boards are right now kind of in a state of flux, like we all are with everything. But in terms of trying to conduct business and making decisions for the corporation, it's been a little bit of a challenge to figure out what's appropriate and what isn't. So we're getting a lot of questions about whether meetings can be held electronically, what are some best practices in terms of holding meetings electronically if they're allowed to do so. So as I was noticing on the chat, there's been some questions already regarding virtual meetings, whether it be of owners or of board meetings. And I'd like to just share a little bit of breaking news from late this afternoon regarding the April 24th order in council that was made that essentially allowed condominiums to hold meetings of owners or board meetings electronically without a bylaw permitting it to do so. So today, something that doesn't really happen in the legislature very often, a bill was introduced and went through all three stages of readings and received royal assent all in the span of one day. And that bill, and just because it's kind of a long name, I'm just going to make sure I'm reading it here correctly, is Bill 190, and it's an act to enact one act and amend various acts in respect of COVID-19 and to make other amendments. So this Bill 190 has essentially codified what that ordering council attempted to do, or what it did do. So the ordering council, just as a reminder, on the 24th, basically allowed for, during the duration of the emergency period, there would be postponement of certain AGMs. It would allow AGMs and board meetings to be called and held virtually, specifically for board meetings, even if directors hadn't consented to it, and allowed all notices of meetings to be given electronically, even if the owners hadn't consented to it. So what Bill 190 does is it amends a ton of different pieces of legislation, but in doing so, it also amends the Condominium Act and provides a little bit of more clarity to that ordering council that was made. So now Bill 190 has amended the Condo Act by adding a new part 4.1, which defines a period of emergency as extending for a period of 120 days following the end of the declared emergency. So as was mentioned earlier today, Premier Ford extended the declaration of emergency to June 2nd presently. So that would mean that under this new legislation, corporations would be able to hold their meetings electronically under these same conditions for at least 120 days, or about 4 months after the end of the declaration of emergency. So this could keep being extended if the Premier decides to extend it past June 2nd. But for the meantime, there's some certainty that over the course of the next, give or take 4.5, 5 months, corporations will still have these powers to be able to hold these meetings electronically and virtually. That being said, I still think it's important to highlight that under the Condo Act, specifically Section 32, a board can't be making decisions or can't be conducting business as a corporation outside of a meeting. So even though boards might feel that in this time and age, you can just send emails to one another and decide by way of email, that's technically not appropriate. The good thing is that you can definitely have meetings that are called, even if people haven't consented to it and are willing to, you're able to have those meetings and transact business on behalf of the corporation. So it's a good step by the government and an amazingly fast step done by the legislature, which you don't really see. And I'm about to wrap up, but I kind of wanted to leave off with some, best practices, because while electronic meetings are a welcome solution, they may not always be suitable for complicated or contentious meetings, and it'll take a while for corporations and boards to get used to holding these meetings online. So perhaps I would recommend that safeguards be implemented that will allow for full director participation, transparency, accountability, and proper record keeping. So there's a lot of different tools available out there, like recording of Zoom meetings, or emails, and keeping records of chats, so that there's a proper record being created for corporations. And I'll wrap up with that, and thanks again for letting me participate here.
Thanks, Louis. So I guess when it comes to board interactions during COVID, the interactions are now based on technology. That's where the direction is going.
Entirely.
All right, thanks. Okay, so moving on to another topic, we have Evan and John from our board of directors who are going to talk about tendering and things that you need to think about as we're starting to get ready to open for business. So I think, Evan, you're going to start us off. And in terms of tendering and the tendering process, what should we be thinking about to get ready?
Well, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, so we've been asked whether it's a good idea right now to look at the upcoming projects and whether we should start tendering. And the short answer is yes. It never hurts to have that information. So right now there are tenders going out and we are tendering, but it's typically for projects that we know are going to go ahead during this COVID time, things that have been deemed essential or health and safety, and those things have been going out and being tendered. But what about projects that we know don't currently meet those criteria that, we're looking at starting once this is over, whether that's June or July or August? And the answer is yes. We definitely think there's a lot of benefit to tendering now. One, we've seen in some cases that the current tender prices that we're getting has been aggressive. So there's the chance that you could get some good pricing out there right now with some of the contractors. But I think as I look forward, what I think is going to happen is we have all these projects that haven't happened since, from February on to now and potentially into June. And once that those restrictions start coming off of these projects, there's going to be a lot of volume. There's going to be contractors that are going to be hard pressed to keep up with quoting everything. And then even once things start to get going, the concern is, or potential concern is can they handle all the work that's coming up? We're going to take a year's worth of work and put it into 6 months or 5 months or 4 months. And so getting your tenders out and getting them done now, getting your pricing, one will lock you in with your contractors. Maybe look to make sure that your work is scheduled first, or even if the pricing is going to change, if having that tender will mean you'll know what the price is. So if you're looking at one of the boards that has had to really reduce or try to find ways to be creative with your reserve fund and the contribution levels, finding out what some of these major projects are going to cost post COVID-19, having that information is beneficial. There's other risks that we're looking at is what happens when all these projects start going. Can the manufacturers of our construction materials keep up? Specifically, say windows. These things need to be ordered when the project is going, and if all these projects start to go ahead again, 1 year's worth of projects being done in 6 months, it is a concern. So being proactive and getting that information is definitely what we're recommending. It does not hurt to go in and tender now. There's the potential that you tender and then you're not going to go ahead this year and the board or the condominium has spent money in engineering fees for that, but it's very minor in comparison to the overall construction costs. So it is something that we recommend. John's going to talk about when we are ready to tender what that process should look like right now.
Thanks, Evan. Some great points on getting in the queue, if you will, of the flood of work to be done. The two biggest things that we've seen in our tendering process over the last few months is related to how to conduct a bidders meeting, an on-site bidders meeting, or if one is even required. And then secondly, what we are asking contractors to provide. So to the first point, the bidders meeting, the several that we've done have been scheduled. So what we do is we schedule a maximum of 2 bidders to walk around with one of the consultant team, and our preference is that no owner's reps be present. So there's a group of 3 people. In one case, one of the bidders actually showed up with his FaceTime on, and his senior guy was sitting at his work from home place and asking him questions as we were walking around the site and establishing what sorts of work needed to be done and how to price it and things like that. So we're seeing, technology creep into bid meetings. Scheduled bid meetings, we typically have around 6, maybe as many as 8 bidders coming to the site to look around. So schedule them so you keep them in as small a group as possible and really ask the question, do you actually need to have the bid meeting? I mean, if you're just pricing X number of square feet of sidewalk, mark it out in red paint and tell them to go one at a time and look at it themselves. And then just communicate properly with any questions that come up during that or as a result of that. To the second point, the procedures that we're asking contractors to follow when we do release tender documents, we're just asking them quite simply to follow the Canadian Construction Association's recommendations on how to conduct yourselves during COVID times. Occupational health and safety on construction sites has always been the contractor's responsibility. And so those costs will be in one form or another in your bids and your tenders. And so, allow your consultants to stick handle that for you, make sure that the proper procedures are being put in place and followed if the work proceeds, and get your work into that queue. And I think that's really all I have is so those 2 points, unless, Evan, you want to expand any further on either one of them.
No,
well, actually, Evan, I'm going to cut you off there because we're running out of time. If you have any further points, maybe put them in the chat box and we can continue that conversation in the chat box. Thanks, Evan and John. All right, so moving on to our next topic. We've had some questions about how do you deal with a death in the unit? And it's been in the context of COVID. So we reached out to some people in the industry who would know this answer. And we're very lucky tonight because Stephen Reynolds is joining us. And as I indicated at the beginning, he's a funeral director. He has lots of experience with dealing with death in condos and what's the standard process. And we've asked him, has the process changed at all because of COVID? And if it has, what it is? And if it hasn't, what is the standard process? So Stephen, can you give us some idea of what happens when there is a death in the unit and if there's any changes because of COVID?
Of course. Thank you, Sonia. I just wanted to introduce myself. As Sonia said, I'm the president of the OACFP and manager of Oakview Funeral Home in downtown Oakville. The OAC represents cemetery directors, funeral directors, crematorium operators, and suppliers to the bereavement sector for such things as PPE. You hear that in the media a lot currently. For 5 minutes on your important meeting here tonight, and thank you for the invite. I will try and get as much information as I can in so that your guests walk away with the most information here that would be relevant given a death in a unit. So the death in a unit, probably the number one thing that people would want to know is, who do I call? What do I do? So has it changed with COVID? No. Our practices are the same. When someone passes away at home, potentially they're in a planned death at home program, or they're under the care of a doctor or a nurse, so that you are not necessarily to call 911, although I'm sure if you expect someone has passed away, you're panicked. 911 is not the call if you know that the person is in fact deceased. A doctor or a nurse will attend and pronounce the death. At that time, you can call the funeral home. Now, the funeral home lines currently in Ontario, 95 to 99% are answered by a live human being 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Once the certificate is signed at the residence, then the funeral home can arrive at the condo. Now, upon arrival, so many condos have different scenarios. Some have a concierge or a security. So you definitely want to make sure that they are aware that we are coming. So the family member should tell the concierge or security that we are coming, and they should arrange for the superintendent to meet us. Some prefer the front door, others prefer that we attend at the service entrance around the back of the building sometimes. So we want to make sure the superintendent is there to allow us to get onto the service elevator. Ensure the parking gate is available to be open for the transfer vehicle when it arrives at the condo as well. The elevator should be placed on service when we are in the midst of a transfer from the death in a unit, so that we aren't stopping at other floors on the way down. So we can't emphasize enough to the property managers and the superintendents on site that we need that privacy for the discretion of the families that we serve. Obviously, we are going to encourage people to pre-plan their cemetery and funeral arrangements, so it isn't necessarily the shock value, and you know exactly what the steps are when a death happens. If not, you're sort of dealing with 87 questions all at once, and it's very challenging for the families. You want to make sure that you have a will put in place, and to make sure that the executor knows the wishes, what funeral home is to be called upon a death, and that kind of thing. And please don't keep your will in your safety deposit box. Banks are closed on weekends, and we very often need to see proof of who is the executor. How has funerals, how have they changed during COVID-19? Obviously, there are groups of 5 allowed to gather. Funerals are exempt from that. We are allowed to gather in groups of 10, inclusive of any clergy that would be present. And that's for both funerals in a funeral home or at the cemetery graveside as well. The funeral director staff will also be asking potential screening questions, the same questions you would get if you've been away. Are you currently exhibiting any fever or any other symptoms of COVID-19? Some of you have been to funerals where there's food and beverage service at a reception potentially. All of that is on hold until the guidelines are relaxed and we can start to do funerals like normal again. Of course, much like your condos, there's extra cleaning that is taking place around the funeral homes. Obviously, once a family leaves, cleaning is extensive and wiped down. And we've seen some of the cleaners in the chat box here tonight that we use as well. I am staying around till the end. If you do have any questions, put them in the chat box or reach out to me. You can get us at oacfp.com, or the Bereavement Authority of Ontario also has a website with extensive COVID-19 regulations at bao.ca. Sonia, that's it for me.
Thank you. So it looks like nothing has changed in terms of procedures. Once
No.
you get the death certificate signed by the medical professional, call to the funeral home, and then you guys kind of take it from there.
That's right. We're usually there within an hour.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve, for clarifying and answering those questions that we've been getting.
Okay.
All right, so our final topic tonight is nuisance. And I'm going to start off the discussion, and then Bill Norris, who is from our CCI Windsor chapter, is going to join in the discussion at the end to talk about it from a property manager's perspective. So in terms of nuisance, we seem to be getting a lot more calls in the last couple of weeks, especially about noise. And so I'm going to just sort of concentrate my comments on the noise issue. And it's not surprising. We have more people working from home. Kids are home from school. People are stressed. People's patience are wearing thin. There's bound to be complaints. And so I would just want to leave basically everyone with 4 points. And that is that in terms of the condo's duty to deal with complaints, nothing has changed in that respect. We still have that same duty to deal with the complaints and to take reasonable steps to enforce. In terms of the circumstances that we are working under, obviously that has changed, and that has an impact on what is reasonable. And then how do we deal with the nuisance complaints? That's changed a little bit in terms of the approach that we take, at least from my perspective. And then the very last thing that I want to kind of leave with everybody is that the key word when we're talking about nuisance is reasonableness. That's what it all comes down to. Whether you're the condo board acting, you've got to be reasonable in your enforcement. If you're the owner who's complaining, you've got to be reasonable in your complaints. And if you're other owners in the building, you've got to be reasonable in the type of noise that you're making. So it all comes down to reasonableness. And that's because that's how nuisance is defined in law. So if we take a look at a couple of cases, we have the Dyke case from a couple years ago that clearly said that noise has to be excessive. Ordinary residential use is not going to equate to nuisance. A recent case from January of this year, York Condo 473, said that the test for nuisance requires the interference with the owner's use and enjoyment that is both substantial and unreasonable. So a little bit of noise is not going to be substantial. The question is, when do you get to that standard of substantial? So in terms of COVID, because more people are home, there's more activity going on, especially in our region. We have a lot of condos that are made of wood construction, which contributes to the noise problem. Everyone needs to be reasonable, but what is reasonable is changing because of the context. And so what may be reasonable now may not have been reasonable in December, just because we're in a different context. So at the end of the day, everyone's going to have a little bit more tolerance to the noise. Boards are going to have to decide whether in the circumstances the noise is reasonable. So what do you do if you're the board or you're a property manager? Well, you're going to do the same things you've always done. You're going to investigate, you're going to document everything. Document. Those are my 3 favorite words. But things that you would normally do, you might not be able to do, like the unit inspection. So how do we get creative in terms of doing the unit inspection? Well, one, you can ask the owner to take pictures of the unit and show you what's in the unit so that you can see whether there's carpeting down, whether there's enough furniture in there to sort of abate some of that noise, and have you send those pictures. I like the idea of doing a Zoom meeting with the owner and have the owner walk around the unit and give you a tour of the unit to see what's actually in the unit. That would be the closest to a unit inspection. The other nice thing about the Zoom meeting is you can record it, and that creates another record for the corporation. Don't forget, it's really important to make sure the owner who's making the complaint also has to do some work, and that needs to be in terms of a log. So make sure you're getting the owners who are complaining to keep a log for at least a week. I like to keep them for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Noting down the day, the time, the duration of the noise, and most importantly, what kind of description, a description of what the noise is about. It's funny, I've had 2 cases in the last week and a half where there was a complaint about children making noise, and when we contacted the owner, there's no children in the unit. And then I had another one where there was complaints about the unit above, and when we contacted the owner, that unit's been vacant for about 4 months. So that brings back to my 3rd point is how we deal with these complaints. Obviously, you're going to send a letter out to the owner of the unit where the complaint about the noise is being reported, but be careful about your tone. You don't want to accuse or assume that the complaint is necessarily valid. I would change the tone of these letters so that you are inviting discussion. And I think that's the key change in how I would approach these right now, is that you want to investigate, you want to have discussions with people to find out what is going on and to try and see if you can actually mediate these early on before they escalate. And I don't see any reason why boards or property managers or even the corporation's lawyers at the initial stage can't try and see if we can find a solution to these problems. And an informal mediation method. If that doesn't work, we can always take it to the next step and hire a mediator and do a formal mediation. But right now, we would probably all benefit from trying to resolve these complaints as soon as possible. So at the end of the day, everyone needs to be more reasonable. Everyone needs to be more tolerant. And having said that, Bill, I'm going to pass it over to you. And what's your experience over the last couple of weeks in dealing with this?
Well, thank you, Sonia. In preparing for this, I went and looked at what's the definition of nuisance, and I found some very interesting. What is nuisance? Well, a regular nuisance is a person, thing, or circumstance causing inconvenience or annoyance. But in law, it's different, and I think you mentioned it. In law, it's an unlawful interference with the use and enjoyment of land. So my thought is when you get a call, the first thing you have to do is investigate. The second thing is mitigate the nuisance if there's anything you can do about it from a property manager standpoint. And you also mentioned mediate. If right up front you can try to do your own mediation, that'd be great. And along with that is to negotiate with, first of all, the people making noise, secondly, the people making the complaint, and thirdly, your board of directors, who usually are very often lose their mind when they're getting multiple people knocking on their doors and saying, this person's making noise, that person's making noise. So usually we get a phone call as a manager. You get a phone call or an email, and you get a person complaining. Most often, since COVID, it's been noise. Second is smoking, and we haven't surprisingly had any parking. I haven't had any parking issues since people have been home. They're not leaving the parking lot. They're not losing spaces and people. But we've had a huge increase in calls, in noise calls. When I get a increased call, I use what I call a nuisance meter, a 1 to 10 nuisance meter, from everywhere from a person who's calm.
Bill, I'm just going to stop you for a second. I'm going to shut off your video because your audio is coming in and out. So I'm going to just shut your video off so that hopefully we can get a better audio from you, okay?
Oh, alrighty.
All right, go ahead.
All right. I was just introducing something that we use. It's called a nuisance meter. After somebody called in the office, we talk about, well, how bad was that nuisance? Was it a 1? You know, people who are normal. Or was it a 10, somebody over the top losing their mind? And we have to deal with everything in between. I bet a lot of the noise since COVID, particularly mentioned children, they've been happening all the time, but no one's home. No one's been next door because they've left for work at 8 o'clock in the morning. The kids start making noise, and very few are there to hear. Now being home 24/7, hear everything, and they listen for everything, and we allow ourselves with all the noise to be annoyed by everything. Managers get all the phone calls, but not always. Board members get them too, and we recommend to boards, all of our boards, please don't be all the people call a manager. They call a manager, then we say to them, I don't get complaints over the phone. Can you hear me?
Bill, yeah, no, you're cutting in and out. I think we've got a bad connection there. I think maybe what we should do is, can you maybe put some of your points in the chat box while I wrap things up?
Oh, well, let me talk slower.
No, it's not the speed, it's the connection.
All right.
I think
I have some takeaways, and I'll write them in.
Yeah, just put some points in the chat box there so we can still get them across. I know one of the points that Bill and I talked about on the phone when we were preparing for today, which I thought was a great suggestion, was for everybody to take a breath and step away for a couple hours before you react. And that's another good point in terms of just cooling everybody down. So pay attention to the chat box there. Bill's going to put some of his tips in there. And we're going to wrap up the session tonight. It's past 8 o'clock now, and unfortunately, we've come to the end of another great webinar. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I want to thank all of the speakers for joining us tonight and sharing their insight and knowledge and wisdom. If you have any questions that did not get answered, please send them to admin@ccihuronia.com. We'll try and reach them on our next webinar. And if you've put them in the chat box, you don't need to send them again. We will be checking that chat box when we start planning for next week's seminar. Also, we're still looking for tips and tricks, so send them to admin@ccihuronia.com. Don't forget, a recording of tonight's webinar will be posted on the CCI Huronia website shortly, hopefully within the next 48 hours. So if you enjoyed tonight's webinar and you want to watch it again, go for it. And if you know someone who missed us tonight and would benefit from any of the information, share the link to our website and tell them to check us out there. In terms of some upcoming events at our CCI chapters across Ontario, CCI London is having their No Stupid Questions webinar on May 26th. You can check it out on their website, cci-sw.on.ca. CCI Eastern Ontario is starting their 4-part director's course on June 4th. Check that out at cci.easternontario.ca. CCI Toronto released their Condo Convo new season last week, so you can find that on their website. Also, they will be having some webinars coming up in May, June, and July, so check out their website for those webinars. And CCI Grand River has their Leaders Circle webinar on June 9th. So we will see you next week, Tuesday, May 19th at 7 p.m. Don't forget, you will need to register again for the webinar in order to get the link. An email blast will go out within the next couple days. Until next time, I'm Sonia Hodis, and once again, I ask you, be safe, be patient, be reasonable, be kind, stay home, wash your hands. Let's all work together to crush COVID. And from the entire CCI family to your family, wishing you another great week, and we'll see you again next week on May 19th. Good night, everyone.